Welcome to your 5-letter word. I'm your host, Christina, and in each episode, we explore how intentional communication and a strong mindset can transform your business, your relationships, and your personal growth. Whether we're covering communication strategies or sharing tips to shift your mindset, this podcast will help you learn to create more meaningful conversations in your life so that you can deepen your relationships and grow your business. So sit back, relax, and soak in the insights as we dive into today's conversation. Welcome to this episode of your 5-letter word. Today, we're going to be talking about how reading, that's right, reading, can significantly improve your communication skills. So let's jump right in. Most of us associate reading with the idea of sitting down and reading a book. As in going to the bookstore, going to the library, picking out a book that you really like, sitting down and reading it. But I'm going to challenge you to take it one step further. We read all day long. The text messages that come through your phone, when you're scrolling on social media, when you're reading the news, when you're reading your work emails, work documents, etc. We read all day long. We just don't associate it with reading. But here's the thing. The type of material that we are exposed to, the type of language that we're exposed to, the level of difficulty of the reading that we're exposed to, all of these things influence how we communicate and our own communication style. So let me give you an example of what I mean. Imagine the majority of your reading comes from scrolling on your phone, either through social media posts or perhaps like YouTube comments, maybe some news articles here and there, but more or less sort of casual, informal sources. This is totally fine, but I want you to consider the type of language and the type of communication that you're then being exposed to on a regular basis. That likely looks like a lot of slang, perhaps even mistyped comments, language that is typically easier to read, as in if we were rating it like on a grading scale in terms of like grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, high school level, university level, that type of material would typically be a lot lower in the grading scale, meaning it's a lot easier to read. Now, that's not a bad thing necessarily, but in the grand scheme of things, I want you to consider this. If on a daily basis you are exposing yourself to material and information and just the general communication style of a lower level difficulty or a lower level education level, how do you think that is impacting your own ability to communicate? Because here's the thing, our brains are extremely efficient and extremely interesting. Have you ever heard of the use it or lose it principle? Essentially, what it is our brains store so much information, too much information. So naturally, when there is information that we are no longer using, our brains actually delete that information, if you will. So there's a process that our brains go through called synaptic pruning. And essentially what that is every single thing that we learn forms neural connections in our brains. Quite literally the pathway of information, right? The neurons connect to each other. It forms a pathway. This is how we remember things. This is how we learn things. The more that you learn, the stronger that connection becomes. The more that you use it, the stronger the connection becomes. That's how habits are formed. But the brain is amazing. And when you are not using something, those connections get weaker and weaker, and then they essentially get removed from your brain. So that's why, think about all the stuff you learned in school. Perhaps you even learned a second language when you were in school that you now can't really speak anymore. Why? Because when you don't use the things that you learn, you forget them and your brain deletes them. Now, this exact principle applies to the way that you communicate. The word choice that you're able to use naturally, right? the way that you speak, the level of sophistication that you speak with. All of this is impacted not only by how you naturally speak every day, but also by the types of information and the types of sort of sources and the difficulty of these sources that you're being exposed to. That's why, for many high school students, the transition to college and university is really hard because they're used to reading and receiving information at a certain level. And now all of a sudden, they jump to this new tier, this new difficulty level that they're not used to. And for many, that's very overwhelming. But what happens to the students who stick with it and who read those research articles and who learn how to do so effectively? Then they're able to do it. They're able to process the difficult academic research that they're reading, right? What about someone who decides to pick up like an old Shakespeare novel? The first few pages are frustrating and difficult to get through, and you're not sure what the heck you're reading. But if you take the time to digest it and process it, you increase your own capacity to receive that information, to process it, to understand it, and also to use it. So, this is an extremely important concept that I want you to understand because what you are exposing yourself to, the level of the information that you're consuming every day, is impacting your own ability to communicate. So, going back to our social media example, if you are being exposed to, let's say, social media posts, the captions and the comments on the social media posts, those tend to be lower educational levels, easier to read, simple words, simple terms. And again, that's not bad. But if that is all that you're exposing yourself to, then you will lose your capacity to understand more complex information and to articulate yourself using more complex terms. Because again, use it or lose it. So, keeping that in mind, here's why reading is an extremely important way and an extremely easy way that you can actually start to improve the way that you communicate on a day-to-day basis. So, number one, I want you to track what you are exposing yourself to and the difficulty of the information that you're consuming. Think about the details of what you're reading. Are you reading the same kinds of words over and over? Are you exposed to slang or informal language that you may not be able to use in your career or in your place of work? Are you exposed to the same types of ideas over and over? Right? The same kinds of opinions? Are you in a little bit of an echo chamber and limiting your own exposure to different perspectives? Right? Start to consider these things because for many of us, it starts to happen naturally, automatically, especially with the way that most social media algorithms are set up. And so, learning to be intentional with recognizing when this is happening to you gives you the ability to change that. It gives you the ability to look for other information, for other perspectives, for more difficult, reading material to consume. So again, you don't need to go out necessarily and buy a complicated book to read and to force yourself to get through it, but you could be more intentional with the types of content that you're reading online. If you enjoy going through YouTube and social media comments, that's fine. But include 10 to 15 minutes a day where you may be reading more reputable news sources just to expose yourself to different perspectives, different type of communication styles, different language and word choice. All of this will improve the way that you communicate as well. Okay, number two, I want you to start exposing yourself to content that you're not familiar with, to communication styles that you don't typically use, as well as to words that you're unfamiliar with. We all tend to develop habits, including in the way that we speak, which usually means that we tend to say the same words over and over. Now, what that means is when you go to describe something, when you go to share your perspective, your opinion, you will default to the same types of words over and over. Now, that may seem comforting and that may seem natural. But when you're talking to other people, especially if you're talking to the same group of people over and over, you'll just start to sound repetitive. That's when you'll start to hear things like, I've heard that before, or you don't need to tell me this again. Or they just don't want to listen to you because you're saying the same thing in the same way over and over. So not only do you need to expose what you are exposing yourself to and not only do you need to increase what you're exposing yourself to, but you need to also be intentional with increasing the variety and the difficulty of what you're being exposed to so that you can be intentional with learning new words. If you come across a word you don't understand, take a moment, open a new tab on your phone, Google it, look up the meaning. Think of when you can use that word in a context. When you are going to send an email or a text message, be intentional with swapping out some of the words that you always use for some new adjectives or some new nouns. You can say the exact same thing 5 different ways if you take a moment to actually think about it and process how you can say it differently. Otherwise, by default, with our habits, we will communicate in the same way over and over. So if you're looking to improve the way that you communicate, start to be very mindful and pay attention to what you're saying, especially if you're saying the same thing over and over. Okay, so you're going to go ahead, you're going to expose yourself to more difficult sources of information. You're going to look up difficult words that you don't know. And you're going to be intentional with looking for more words to say the same thing. Essentially, being intentional with increasing your vocabulary, because the more words that you know and the more ways that you know how to use them, the better you are at articulating your ideas. And then you're perceived as being a better communicator. Now, the last way that you can really use reading to improve your communication is by reading out loud. Now, hear me out. Again, going back to the idea, we're reading all day long our text messages, comments, emails, news, etc. Use that opportunity to improve the way that you communicate quite literally through the way that you would deliver a piece of information. Let's say this may be a little bit harder if you work physically in an office, but it's still possible. You can also do this in your spare time, or if you're alone, if you're in the car, etc. Whatever you would be reading on your phone, say a news article, read it out loud and start to pay attention to how you sound when you're reading out loud, the way that you quite literally deliver what you're saying. So paying attention to things like your volume, how loud or how quiet do you speak? Do you start really loud and then fade off in the middle of your sentence? Do you sound confident when you speak? Do you project your volume enough that other people will actually take the time to listen to you, right? These are things that you can start to pick up on when you read out loud. Another thing to work on would be your tone. How do you sound? What emotion are you conveying? Do you sound really monotone and disinterested? Sure, it may be easy to say, I am disinterested. I am just reading an email my coworker sent me. But think about the implications of that. If you're always sounding disinterested when you talk to others, how are they going to perceive you, especially over a prolonged period of time? Okay, so read out loud and notice, what's your volume like? What's your tone like? What's your body language like when you read? What are your facial expressions like? Are you very expressive? Do you read something and when you disagree, your face automatically says it? And if anyone was in the room, they'd know instantly you disagree, right? How confident do you sound when you speak? How much do you hesitate? Do you include enough variety when you talk so that you're interesting to listen to? Do you talk too fast or too slow? Right? Imagine you're reading out loud and that's the first time you really process how you sound. You might notice that you tend to be very slow and not include a lot of variety in your volume or tone. And now all of a sudden it may click why people don't listen because they find you boring. Versus if you read out loud really, really fast and then you realize that you're not processing any pauses or any gaps in the sentences so that other people don't even know when one sentence finished and another sentence started and they don't actually understand what you're saying because you're talking so fast. Oh, that might be a great insight. But it all starts with taking that initial awareness, even if it's just by reading emails out loud or reading news articles out loud. Whatever it is, pick something. If you want to take it one step further, get a book. Get an actual physical book and practice reading the book out loud and be intentional with reading out loud in a way that would make you an amazing communicator. AKA, pretend that you're putting on a performance, pretend that you're doing a presentation while reading a page in a book. Can you speak in a way that is engaging and fun and uses your facial expressions wisely and has variety in the way that you talk, right? And has good tone, good volume, good rate of speech. All of these things may seem small on their own, but all of these things combine to make you the type of communicator that you are. And the more of these small pieces that you can do well, the more they combine to make you an extremely effective and influential communicator. That might seem like it's not really a big deal, but when you consider the implications of being a good communicator at work, it's worth taking the time to do this. Okay, so that's how you can use reading to improve the way that you communicate starting today. Before we finish this episode, my 5-letter word for you is novel. Novel. Not only can books quite literally help you improve the way that you communicate, especially if you take the time to read them out loud, but expose yourself to novel, to new information, to new sources, to new words, to new ways of speaking. You will be surprised by how fast you improve the way that you communicate simply by doing these things. Okay, so as usual, let me know what your biggest takeaway was from this episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Your 5-Letter Word. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And as always, I love to hear about your breakthroughs. I'm here to serve your soul a cup of peace and a slice of joy. Until next time, take care.